I have thought a lot about this. It's interesting because it was one of the first lessons I learned after hitting the bestseller list, and something that has become so ingrained, I've actually set it aside. But the month or so after my first big break, Presence was the first book that came out. It hit the bestseller list. It was shortlisted for the Gold Medallion Award for the year. And I had an opportunity to sit down and talk with the pastor of the Willow Creek Church, which at the time was one of the largest churches in the United States. And he said something very interesting. He knew that I came from business and that this whole issue of moving into bestsellerdom was something that was completely alien. He said two things. First of all, easy as it sounds, hard as it is, the issue is not what do you do when you become creatively depleted. The issue is how do you keep from arriving at that point. And what he suggested was that I keep in mind as things move forward that everyone who combines the creative with the spiritual needs to keep in mind that there are two different kinds of gifts. On the one hand, there are the gifts that, in his words, he called them natural, but I think in many respects, both of these are natural. But the primary gifts, which is the way that I came to see them, the primary gifts are gifts that when you are doing this, you become energized. You may wind up being exhausted at the end of it, but the energy flow, the sense of binding yourself with something greater is an intense component of this type of gift. What I call the secondary gifts are the ones that leave you exhausted, depleted. And for me, that includes most of the things that have to do with the commercial process. For me, the writing, the creating is what energizes. The professional, the commercial, which is absolutely necessary, is something that I am exhausted by, I am depleted by. And his advice was that when you arrive at a point where you recognize the depletion, you need to do something that is self-centered, that energizes you in a way that is uniquely yours. And his, interestingly enough, and this is a pastor, his means of getting over these things, which for him were things like going to the hospital, dealing with the dying, he found that it was something that was necessary, something that he was good at, but at the same time, it just left him wounded. And his response to this, the self-centered action that he did, was he raced cars. He was a member of a car club that allowed him to take these supercharged cars out on a circuit and just blast away. For me, for most of my life, it's been surfing. Art museums do this for me, musical concerts, but there is a feeling of guilt at times in taking these steps. And there's a difference between something that is self-centered and something that is selfish. You're doing this in order to bring yourself back to the point where you are able to do the creative, do the giving in a wholesome way. The other experience came about a year later. Things had been moving quite rapidly, and I met a former Olympian. He was the captain of the British Olympic team in, I want to say 1954, but it was something like that. When I met him, he was 91 years old and he was still cycling. He was a gold medalist in indoor cycling. He was still cycling 10 miles a day at the age of 91. He had retired, obviously, from the sport and had become one of Britain's biggest motivational speakers and coaches for executives moving into the higher echelons. And he said that there was a big difference between the sport challenge, or the sport boundary was how he called it, and the professional challenge or the professional boundary. He said in sports, if you're going to be successful as a professional competitor, you needed to find your boundary, find the limits of your ability and push beyond them. He said for the creative, it was necessary to find your boundaries and take one step back, because the only way that you can maintain constancy is by being respectful of your boundaries rather than constantly challenging them. Short term, it's fine. I'm thinking here of my experience on film sets where everyone is pushed to 18, 20-hour days, and at the end of it, pretty much everyone is shattered by the experience. But then there's that pullback. What we're talking about with most creative processes is constancy, looking for something that you can maintain on a daily and weekly basis.